From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Shari. There is a big thunderclap over Canberra tonight. There is breaking news and it involves national security. I'm going to discuss this in greater detail with our panellists, Bronwyn Bishop and with Joe Hildebrand. But the ASIO boss, Mike Burgess, is currently giving a speech in Canberra where he lays out the threat assessment. Now, he's spoken about a potential rise in Islamic terrorism in the country, but I think what's going to dominate the headlines in the next 24 hours is this part, that apparently there was a plot from an Australian politician, a former Australian politician, to act on the behalf of a foreign government, and there was even a plan at one point in time to try to bring a Prime Minister's relative into the orbit of these foreign spies. Now, there is no clue or suggestion in the articles that have come out. We'll obviously try and turn the speech around for you as fast as we can about whether it's China or Russia or North Korea or many other adversarial nations. But I'm going to quote from some of the speech to you now to detail exactly what is going to be the big story for the next 24 hours. And it reads like this. While deciding not to identify the nation behind the A-Team foreign spy unit, Burgess said that members posed as consultants, headhunters, local government officials and researchers while claiming to be from a fictional data company called Data 31. Regarding the former Australian politician who was at the heart of this or believed was co-opted by this group, the politician, according to Burgess, and this is a direct quote, sold out their country, party and former colleagues to advance the interests of a foreign regime. At one point, the former politician even proposed bringing a Prime Minister's family member into the spy's orbit. He goes on in the speech. Fortunately, the plot did not go ahead, but other schemes did. Burgess did not identify the politician who was recruited by the spies or the political party. Now, obviously, the Canberra Columbos will try and work this out, and by that I mean the reporters in the next little while. But again, one of the other issues that was a particular concern for Mike Burgess, and again, I'm just reading from the text of his speech now, is that his concern was that somebody was going to infiltrate things like our telecommunications or our power grid network, and during times of particular stress, previously exampled big shutdowns like Optus, but there's no suggestion obviously that that was connected to this, but an example of those foreign adversaries being able to make the most of technical problems inside telecommunications companies, or on particularly extreme weather days, shutting down the power infrastructure. There's also been an attempt to exchange money for information about national security plans, including, yes, the insides of AUKUS. Again, all of this we are just learning about now, but I wanted to open the show with it because I've got a feeling it's going to be a very big part of the next 24 hours. But let's have a little chat about some of the business that's been going on in Canberra today before this story broke. Now, let's be honest, the Prime Minister would like if the Australian media all treated him like 60 Minutes did just before the election.
It's been a carefully crafted makeover. The dramatic weight loss, new specs, new suits. It's all very, well, Prime Ministerial. You'd almost need glasses to recognise the Albo 2.0.
You look like John Curtin. a wartime Prime Minister.
John Curtin's well-fashioned. If you just hold on to it for long enough, it comes back.
Of course, the reality is that anyone who actually reports on what this government has been doing can see plenty of problems that are there for all to see. They can see the broken promises, they can see the lies, and they can see the giant jumps towards the left. So much so that even left-wing newspapers, well, they publish polls that reflect exactly what you see here on Sky News Primetime each and every night, that the coalition is now in front of Labor on two-party preferred and certainly on the primary vote, and the trust factor around this Prime Minister has gone through the floor. There's also the inevitable reaction that Australians have had to the incompetence of the Prime Minister and his staff when boat people arrive in Western Australia.
I've been travelling in the car, so I haven't been advised about that.
And anyone with a brain can see that the Prime Minister either has completely walked away from, or most likely was lying about his $275 power price drop by 2025. Here he was being questioned on Adelaide radio. We went through this chapter and verse last week, but it's as dodgy as it seems.
So is that why the check's not in the mail anymore, the $275?
Well, that occurred right around the world, and we're not immune from that, and that led to global spikes a lot higher.
I know. I guess what I'm trying to ask is,
occurred in Europe.
Factoring all that in, is anyone ever going to get the $275?
Well, what that was modelling on the transition that occurred on the basis that renewables are a cheaper form of new energy.
And because I point this out to you each and every night, because we are relentless, have been before and will be every day into the future about the cost of living and the failure of this Prime Minister, any opportunity he can have to have a not so passive-aggressive, just outright aggressive crack at the media that he doesn't like, he takes. And he did so today in Question Time. Now, this Prime Minister has a glass jaw. You see, he was trying to make a comment about the Liberal Party, but he couldn't help but try to make a snide remark about me, this program, and I would say, by extension, the people who watch it, like you. Now, Matt Canavan was here last night when we were talking about his view as a man with an economics degree about the conversation around the gender pay gap. Remember, we spoke about the difference between average pay versus median pay, and this is exactly the point that my dear friend and colleague Peter Cridlin made in her program last night, and again, this is one of the best editorials on this subject I've seen.
Median pay of the man and the median pay of women in the company, and any resultant pay gap company by company. So let's use BHP as an example. We get the median pay today for all male BHP employees. Then we get the median pay for all the women. And the difference between the men and the women is BHP's pay gap. Now, it doesn't matter if you're comparing a male senior executive with a female receptionist or a female accountant with a male cleaner. It's not about the job done by the employee and what it pays, but what people are paid by their gender.
Excellent. The very reason why we all lean forward to watch her at 6 o'clock each and every night here on Sky News. But that's exactly the point that Matt Canavan was making on our program last night. But the Prime Minister decided to be a smart-ass about it and this show and Matt Canavan and the fact that it was blokes that were talking about it in Question Time.
I commented yesterday about Senator Canavan's statements. But last night he doubled down. He went on as part of a panel of 4 men discussing the gender pay gap in Paul Murray's man cave. I kid you not. He said this: "It's a whole hill of nonsense. It is a completely useless report."
Now again, for those that are half listening, the panel of 4 blokes, I said at this very show, was going to be used as a way of eye-rolling. But as you know, we don't get people on to only ever talk about one topic. It's lots of people to talk about lots of topics. Am I supposed to ignore the topic of the day? Anyway, what is more important to note is that we are under the Prime Minister's skin because we follow the details. We don't follow the narrative. Take the wider media coverage when it came to the Prime Minister's broken promise and too little, too late on tax cuts. What were the numbers that they used? The ones that were in the press release.
Someone on $90,000, currently looking at $1,125, would instead get closer to $1,400.
On $60,000, an extra $804 to $1,179. $75,000 jumps to $1,554. $100,000 now $2,179.
Someone earning $120,000, it's about $1,800 as it stands now. That would go up to $2,200.
But again, the reason why we're under the Prime Minister's skin is because we can spot the BS. We can see the spin. And the reality is that you don't pay tax annually. You pay it every time you get a pay packet. Of course, it's electronic now, but you know what I'm talking about. People get paid weekly, fortnightly or monthly. So it's important to take the big number and divide it by 52 because that's how much money is actually flowing through to people. And as you know by now, the number is not very impressive. It's why I say it's too little, too late. $14 a week is what the median wage earner in the seat of Dunkley will be getting. Otherwise, it's $15, $22, $32 or $41 a week. And even at the $100,000 levels, that's $120 a month. It ain't enough. The polls essentially have gone into a dead cat bounce, and that was confirmed that we've been on the right thing the whole way by calling out the Prime Minister, hence why we are a thorn in his side and Gladly so, because I don't think they're up to it, and I think they lie to people, and I think that they use their relationships inside the press gallery with particularly junior or newer reporters to try to get their message out, where it's the older heads who turn around and can call BS because they've been around before. Well, today, our reporter, Adam Walters, was in Brisbane, where he was asking on the behalf of our news team, not our programs team, our news team, about what people's perception was of the tax cuts. And guess what? It's too little too late.
Have you seen the benefit of those?
No, mate, no. Give us a look.
Nothing. I'm not going to get anything. And the cost of living is just disgusting.
Pretty much a smoke screen because we're still feeling the pinch.
Maybe, but not very much at all, because they will get you another way. It's a catch.
100%. The Prime Minister is also going to take public shots at us. And again, we lead with our chin, but just this is why we irritate him. Not just because he's able to write it off, as he often does, about the crazy talk that happens here at Sky News in prime time, but because we show you what other people are saying about the data that they try to spin. David Crowe, an ultimate lefty of the press gallery, he said, in relation to the sales job of Too Little Too Late, that Anthony Albanese has been spending hours in radio and television studios trying to build a stronger bond with millions of Australians, only to hear a deafening silence instead of a roar of applause. No doubt the PMO is also pissed off with us because we have been highlighting the great work of Christopher Dorr in a brand new website called The Nightly, where every day this week he has been giving the inside word on big problems inside his office and the brave party people who are willing to say the Emperor has no clothes. Here's a couple of examples. I don't think that anybody knows how Albo responds to a decline in popularity and the wheels coming off. That's a Labor MP who said that. Labor colleagues blame hubris and the classic election night folly of victorious opposition leaders. He won. He believes it's all because of him. So because I'm so popular, people love me. Overnight, Australian culture has changed and everyone's become a lefty. Of course, not true. See the Voice results, 60-40. Hell no. He's been cursed with that, and that's why the first half of his term has been so problematic for him. Well, there's even more. In part 2 of the 4-part series, and I'll report on every single one of these because it is fascinating reading. It's the inside story nobody else is saying because everyone else is playing for access. Nobody wants to be cut off by a bloke who can be very petty. Again, read these articles. I'll make sure they're up on our socials. Forgive me, there's a little language here, but we'll bounce around. He needs to get his head out of his backside, not backside as said by a Labor mate. There's a very candid and extremely blunt advice that's being given to the Prime Minister from a Labor mate. Behind the United Public Front, the Nightly has uncovered a barely dominant air of dismay with both Albanese and the Albanistas, which is a left-wing cabal of like-minded sycophantic advisors and MPs who run the government. Who are the hardheads in the party? Who give the good advice? Because half of the Albanese cabal of advisors don't have 2F clues. More. I think he's in quite a lot of trouble, says one government insider. The pool of scare campaigns the coalition can draw on is growing. The first thing is the big mistake of the Voice referendum and hanging so much off that for the first 18 months of power. Voters were worrying about their cost of living and Albo was crying, literally, about something that they weren't interested in. How could he have made such a dumb mistake? And again, to prove the problems that exist, that are not fictions of our imagination, but the reality of people having buyer's remorse, but more importantly, a want to have a crack at this Prime Minister. Somebody again has been leaking from inside the Labor Party, this time to the Herald Sun and to our colleague Andrew Clennell. You see, Labor Party focus groups have been played a version of attack ads that could be launched against the Prime Minister, but these ones are written by the Labor Party about their own leader to check which ones would be most effective. And remember, you can't run an attack ad unless it is based in truth. Anthony Albanese has the wrong priorities. People are being asked if they agree or disagree. He's wasted a year either talking about his Voice referendum or spending time overseas. Airbus Albo, remember? Apparently a complete invention of the media that he doesn't like. If only everyone was obedient as Carl was in the lead up to the election. Oh, you look like Ben Chifley, please. Sorry, John Curtin. Well, Albanese is doing anything else, your grocery bills are more expensive because, you see, the A1 issue, regardless of what the Canberra bubble inside the bubble wants to talk about or wants to distract from, has always been cost of living. This Prime Minister, who promised in opposition to make things lower under a Labor government, has, of course, seen everything go up and up and up. Something that is also turning up in pollsters that normally give advice to the Teals. Here they are speaking with my mate Laura Jays on her show earlier this week.
Parents who are making such cuts to their grocery bills that they eat their dinners separately from their children because they don't want their children to see them eating baked beans for dinner. Like that sort of stuff, you know, it's a gut punch when you're seeing in a focus group and people talk about that and other things. They've eaten through their debt to pay those bills and get through those big ticket things. They are now cutting back on food and groceries. That's where the hurt is. That is primal for people. And I think that's going to really fuel some volatility.
So take your pick. The left-wing reporters, the opinion polls, the insiders willing to leak about what's going on inside the government, the emperor hath no clothes. That is the reality of Albanese as Prime Minister. And as much as he thinks he has his personal and special connection with Australian voters, even the Labor Party are double-checking what attacks are the most effective against them because, of course, it's true. And again, in terms of too little, too late tax cuts, they passed the Parliament yesterday, which meant the Prime Minister was out on the victory tour. But then he ran into, again, my mate Laura Jays, who hit him right between the eyes.
Let's talk tax cuts because that's what's happening in Parliament right now. For most, it's an extra $15 a week from July. It just doesn't seem like enough, Prime Minister. Are you aware of just how tough people are doing it at the moment?
I am. That's why we've been prepared to act, Laura. If you're a mum and dad working, earning $130,000 a year combined, which is an average which is out there, then instead of getting $1,000, you'll get $2,600, a $1,600 increase in your pocket, which will make a difference.
$1,600 for two people works out as $30 a week, $15 each. That's why it's too little, too late. Again, Laura was right on song today. Well done, darling. Here she was, getting him on $275 and the power bills, and guess what? The TV version was exactly the same as the radio version. He's walking away from it, or he was always lying.
Well, if you earn $45,000 a year, you pay little tax. It's about $4,000 a year. Those same people, Prime Minister, are still waiting for $275 off their power bills. Is that going to happen, yes or no?
Well, what you'll get as well is our energy price relief plan has made a substantial difference, not just to people's bills by lowering them,
but importantly
putting that downward pressure on inflation.
Again, imagine if Tony Abbott said, I'm going to stop the boats, and then 2 years in had done nothing about stopping the boats. How would the media be reacting? You see, the Prime Minister wants to pretend that all of his problems don't exist, that the only people who notice them are the people who've always hated him. But the reality is that all of these problems are of his own making, of the expectations of which he set upon his election, and then pretending that because he's able to go and spin a very large number that, of course, ends up being too little too late, that he can do whatever he wants. That he can spend $450 million on a referendum that Australia didn't want and ended up voting 60-40 no, including in Victoria. This is the bloke who thinks that he can take $40 million of taxpayer money and not give it to Food Bank, where 3.7 million Australians have been reaching out to because they can't put food in the table. No, instead it'll be on taxpayer-funded ads to tell you that $14 a week is the greatest gift you've got since a slot car set as a kid. And just finally, another issue. The Prime Minister constantly says he's done everything he possibly can to pull on every single rein when it comes to cost of living. LJ called BS on that too.
So if you say you're doing everything about cost of living and trying to help people out, why don't you cut the petrol excise?
What we're doing is taking the best advice on how we can make a difference without putting pressure on inflation.
few days out before the Frankston by-election, and we'll see whether there is some hatred which is going to make its way back towards the Prime Minister, or whether he is able to dance and spin his way through the obvious, whether his magical powers of connection exist or are long gone, whether the Emperor has no clothes or he's just wearing a pair of budgie smugglers that will get him through till tomorrow. Of course, Frankston is the main city that we went to earlier in this week. Again, thank you to everyone who turned out for that pub test. I love it. I can't wait to do more of them, and we'll be doing so very soon. But again, what is this Prime Minister and what is the Labor Party doing when it comes to the reality of we can do everything when it comes to cutting cost of living? Well, they haven't cut petrol taxes. They're giving $14 a week as a tax cut to the median earners in that particular electorate. But also, they're hiding their plans to increase the cost of aged care. Remember, there's a report which is supposed to have been released by now, but of course it was shelved. It was due in January, it hasn't appeared in February, and presumably we'll hear about it in March. But this will mean that people with houses that are deemed to be of high value, no matter what you have in the bank, you will end up paying more once you get into aged care. But they're not going to tell anyone about that before the election. Meantime, there's also apparently going to be a plan to increase and give the private health funds an increase in the health premiums that you pay. Anyone over $50,000, of course, earning over $50,000 has to have private health insurance, and we're locked into it whether we like it or not, or you end up, of course, paying the double Medicare levy, which is another 1% of your wages. Well, we hear today that there is a plan to increase and to give these companies more money, to increase the cost of living, but we won't find out about it until after people have voted on Saturday. Now, things have changed in this by-election in the past couple of weeks. The assumption was a few weeks ago that Labor would win it because essentially the main reason, of course, for the by-election was the passing of the former MP. They had hoped that by simply invoking her name, keeping her photo up as they have in the local electorate, and no doubt being able to invoke her name as much as possible, that people would be able to vote, well, in memory of her and not in reality of their own circumstances. Again, we will all wait and see what happens on Saturday. I'm not brave enough to say they're going to lose the seat, the Libs will win it. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have any crystal ball. All we have is data to follow here. And remember, the promise was it was 52-48 in favour of Labor at the start of the campaign, and now it's 51-49 in favour of the Libs going into Saturday. And again, I bet the house on what Philip Coury reports. And Philip Coury, well, he reports that they're being prepared for a possible loss. Now, again, at 6%, if the opposition is able to get anything over a 4% swing, that makes a whole bunch of backbenchers nervous going into the 2025 campaign. Anything higher than that becomes even worse for Labor, let alone actually losing the seat. But here's what Philip wrote. In his address to caucus on Tuesday, Mr Albanese noted that since 1983, the average swing against a government was 7.1% in by-elections. The implication was that any swing up to this would be regarded as normal, even if the seat was lost. While the Liberals believe that they're on track for a two-party preferred swing of between 3 and 5%, so they're not at this stage counting it as a win, certainly they'll get enough of a margin to worry some backbenchers. Labor insiders accuse the party of sandbagging, and they say the outcome is so finely balanced it could go either way. In caucus and later in Parliament, the Prime Minister also signalled the challenge presented by the Conservative proxy group Advance Australia, which was effective in helping kill his plan for history, being the voice to Parliament. And he's out there suggesting that Advance Australia is peddling misinformation on the behalf of Mr Dutton. And we all know the word misinformation is a swear word for lefties.
Misinformation.
Misinformation.
Misinformation. The misinformation which is there.
Some misinformation.
Which is why this government is planning to censor the internet. Don't fall for the titles they give the bills, read the actual details. Where millions of dollars of fines will be given to online social media companies if people like you or me post misinformation. Do you think the Prime Minister would think that what is said on this show, even when we quote other people, is misinformation? And if you ended up sharing this editorial or many others from this station, it would fall in the misinformation basket? Oh, but under this law, by the way, guess who is allowed to continue with misinformation? Political parties like the Labor Party, who of course claimed that the Liberal Party was going to privatise Medicare. Not true then, not true now. Another thing that no doubt will play up in the Dunkley by-election is that people want to choose their own car. They don't want Chris Bowen or the Prime Minister to tell them what they can drive. Now, We know that Australians are buying cars in literally record numbers at the moment, but they're not buying EVs. According to the stats put out at the end of last year, it's the gas guzzler that people love to drive, particularly the Ford Ranger and the Toyota Hilux. They literally sell twice as many cars as the third most popular car, which is the D-Max Ute, the RAV4 after that, and electric vehicles, well, nowhere really to be seen. So, of course, the plan is for Australians not to keep buying the cars they want to buy, but to move towards electric vehicles because it will make government officials happier when they go to international climate conferences because, of course, Australia is 1% of global emissions. China is 30% under the Paris Agreement. They can double their pollution every single day, every month, every year until 2030. They're already 30% of the world's problem. Once you throw in the third world and Russia, that's the best part of 2/3 of the world's population. No, but the car you drive is determinant about whether the planet is going to boil or not. Garbage, rubbish. So, of course, left-wing governments are out there saying, literally, you can't even buy a petrol or diesel or hybrid car into the 2030s. The ACT has said, no, you will not be able to, at any of their car yards, buy anything but EVs after 2035. Again, more reporting about the reality here that while Chris Bowen, while Casanova wants to pretend nothing to see here, no cars will be banned, plenty will, including the ones that Australians buy 2-to-1 right now over anything else in the market. The top 3 selling vehicles in the country, the Ford Ranger, the Toyota Hilux, the Isuzu D-Max, are among the thirstiest and will struggle to meet the targets. Sean Hanley from Toyota says the proposed transition timing is too quick, the trajectory is too steep, especially for large four-wheel drives and SUVs like commercials, he says. He goes on. It simply doesn't recognise the technical hurdles, the lengthy time and the substantial cost that will be required to deliver commercial EVs that are practical, capable and affordable. The bloke from Toyota concludes, in short, unless the final scheme is less aggressive, it will have a profound negative impact on regional and rural Australia, and it will reverberate throughout the entire Australian economy. And remember the classic film Mary Poppins? Now, whether you saw it the first time it was around in cinemas, whether you played it on VHS, whether you watched it on TV, bought it on DVD or watch it on one of the many streaming services, it is, of course, a children's classic. But there is one scene in the film that is now causing trouble and will limit the number of kids that will be allowed to watch it. Here is the most offensive bit.
Aye, aye, sir. Cheeky devils!
Now, apparently, that is a reference to South African people of dark skin, and therefore it is racist. So the movie in the UK has gone from a U, or universal rating, we call that a G, where anyone of any age can watch it, and now it's been bumped up to PG. Because, goodness me, the crazy guy who still thinks that he's as part of the Merchant Navy, who said something crazy. Would there be a kid in the world who would even notice the word, let alone ask what it was? Quick break, back with more. So much to talk about, from this spy business in Canberra all the way through to the Prime Minister's glass jaw, Bronwyn Bishop, Joe Hildebrand, and we finish it all off with the wonderful Megyn Kelly. We're just getting started. Good on you. Big Wednesday night here on Paul Murray Live. Thank you so much for watching. Let's get straight into it. Bronwyn Bishop and with Joe Hildebrand. That breaking news out of Canberra, out of the ASIO boss's speech. It is a big one. It'll dominate for the next few days. Now, we do not know what the country is. There is no hints in the speech that I've just seen as to what the country is, whom the former politician is, or what side of politics here. But what it is frightening about is something we have known about in the past, is that countries have tried to infiltrate our system. They have tried to flip people. We've seen multiple examples in the federal parliament. In the state parliaments, and some suggestions about how close things have got in the federal parliament. But Bronwyn, this one's frightening, that yes, a former MP was willing to sell out the country and apparently was trying to hook in a former Prime Minister's family member.
Well, I think we have to follow the lead of the speech, the way the speech was given, and we can't name people either. But to be perfectly honest, I could.
Don't. I love you, but don't. But again, Joe, it is. I mean, it's a legit concern. I don't want to say that it's the only thing that matters in Australia. But when our system is being infiltrated, but our system has already been multiple times infiltrated by data hacks. Right, literally, the Chinese got the ASIO floor plans to their office. There were attacks on the federal parliament, political parties, you name it. So it's a next step up, but geez, it's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Mike Burgess was greatly displeased with the actions of whoever this individual was. But in a sense, I mean, that's the juicy bit. And of course, that's going to be everywhere. I'm pretty sure, like Bronwyn, I know who it was. And there have been sort of reports about this sort of stuff and how deep, I think it's no secret that there are elements of the Labor Party that have gotten too close to elements with links to the Chinese Communist Party. I don't think there's any way it's Russia. I think it's definitely China because, frankly, the Russians just aren't that interested in it.
Just let me add one little bit of info before you continue, which is in the Sydney Morning Herald's reporting of the story, for some reason, they decide to show the Russian embassy in their story. So again, whether that's the link they're trying to send or not, I'm just saying that's part of the detail that's around. My suspicions are the same as everyone else, but I quite enjoy having a job.
Yeah, that's right. Well, like, if there was... let me put it this way. If there was... And again, I won't comment on the accuracy of the Sydney Morning Herald's layout subs, and I think two different things were mentioned, and so they thought, we've got two options here, we'll just chuck one on.
I think the thing is, the obvious thing is that you think China, I think China, and then I look at all these great turbines being imported into the country. What's in them? They wanted Huawei to be the important communications link for all our communications, and very sensibly, that's one sensible thing that Turnbull did. He said no. But why would they stop there? I mean, we import this stuff and we're putting it all over the country. Why wouldn't you try and put it?
I think this is one of the problems when, again, your biggest trading partner is also a potential strategic threat. And so it is difficult. So when you're doing business and doing a trade deal with a Chinese company that has a legal obligation to hand over whatever it knows the Chinese Communist Party if it wants to, at what point does that become?
And don't forget, one of the tactics here was, among other things, to go after academics, offer them trips to come over to form relationships, and then those relationships are what's being flipped. All right, we could go on all night, but again, we all do enjoy being employed. But I think the thing is,
I've said again and again, they want Australia as a vassal state.
Correct. All right, let's talk about Albo's glass jaw. Christopher Dorr, formerly of the Australian newspaper, now at a thing called The Nightly, which is run by Seven West Media, run out of Perth. 1, 2, 3, 4 parts about how the Emperor has no clothes inside the Prime Minister's office. It's the most thorough reporting I've seen of anything inside the Labor Party. Now, Bronwyn, it confirms everything we've known for a while. He'll be able to dismiss it as, it's just a couple of old Shorten's mates in the right wing who were never happy with me, blah, blah, blah. But the reason I went into chapter and verse at the start of the show was, if the Labor Party is running internals at the moment on what is the best attack job on the Prime Minister, they know the bloke's got some problems.
Yes, they do. And the most interesting thing about that story is who leaked the details of what they were doing in testing those potential ads.
Correct.
I mean, you could just lift them up and use them. So there's something seriously wrong going on in the office, and to think that Catherine Murphy's the answer, my God.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the question was, if Catherine Murphy's the answer.
But again, what do you think of those things?
Look, it's a cracking read. I've read all of it, and it sounds very familiar to what people have been telling me, but it's not necessarily what people in cabinet have been telling me, or people, although some may or may not have been. But
there's reference to cabinet.
But the point is, this is the sort of stuff that you get about every government. You think about the Kevin Rudd, kitchen cabinets reporting that ended up being the sort of.
But that resulted in him being punted in his first term. The leaks on Abbott resulted in him being.
That's exactly right. Or rules, Malcolm Turnbull pants off angry.
Correct. Now, but let's be honest. The rules of the Labor Party mean it ain't going to happen, and he is going to go to the next federal election.
I mean, the caucus can say we'll change the rules.
Yes, but that's true. More importantly, in my point here is, again, the propensity of the Prime Minister, his office, his supporters to just pretend all criticism is made up by Sky News Primetime. Well, I can tell you, after spending the time in Dunkley, it lands pretty well what people actually know are the falsehoods of the government. That doesn't automatically mean that there's pining for the Liberal Party. But
Paul,
come on, it ain't made up.
Well, I have said
David
all
Crow's
along,
even writing about it.
nobody ever, in the 20-plus years I sat in that chamber with that man, nobody ever said he was leadership material. All we're seeing is it played out. I was quite right all the way along.
Who's going to rock up to? Who's going to wander up to you and say, "Hey, Mrs. Speaker"?
No. I'm talking in the chat that goes on.
Look, it was a surprise. I think it was a surprise to a lot of people.
So the easy thing is to say, who
He's the
cares,
last
roll
man
on.
standing.
What does he and his people need to learn from the reporting and the sort of stuff we talk about?
Look, frankly, it's a concern I've had, and raised publicly a number of times, which is I worry, I'm very fond of saying that Albo has a concerning amount of confidence that he is someone, and that's a great thing, and you need it in politics. Yeah. But he often thinks, with things like even the previous election result, things like The Voice, that everything's going fine, everything's going okay, even when it's not going okay. That it's still very much in the hunt, and then it turns out to be disastrous. And so I do worry about him surrounding himself with yes men. At the same time, I admire people and politicians who are loyal and who pick and stick, and so I think there is definite value in that. And I think even his critics said that in the article. It's good that he's a strong friend and he doesn't just hang people out to dry.
All right, Bonnie.
It's a
last word here, Dunkley. Let's not get into predictions of who and what and how much, because no one actually knows. But let's see. What are you thinking?
Well, there are 8 candidates in that field, and my bet is it'll go down to where the preferences flow from the independents, the Green, the Victorian socialists.
Pretty sure they're not going to the Libs.
Well, even the Australian Democrats are back in there.
They were on the show on Monday night,
yes,
and also
indeed.
the Libertarian.
It's amazing. The Victorian Socialists almost won an upper house seat at the last state election.
Imagine thinking the Greens are too far to the right.
I know, Victoria is cooked. It is like I was when I was a student socialist, but just never got a job, never changed, never as charming, never got my self-effacing sense of humour and boyish good looks.
So, Bronwyn, Dunkley.
You did change a bit, I take it.
Dunkley, are people getting their expectations too high that the swing is going to be substantial?
No,
therefore, if we're all sitting here and it's basically a return to normal, then the PM's going to march out of it pretty clean.
I think the bottom line is that the swing is probably somewhere between 3 and 5%, which would be good for the opposition and bad for the government. And if it goes further, as I said, I think it'll come down to what happens to those preferences. I think the candidate that the Liberals have got in the field is good, and I think the Labor Party candidate is totally lacking in ability. Otherwise, you would have turned up to your pub.
God love you. Even if you think it's a hostile environment, you still turn up because there's a chance to turn one person.
If you're really good in politics, you love a hostile environment because it gives you the opportunity to bounce
sharpen your language.
Absolutely.
Don't worry, we'll get you and Stephen Connery in front of the live audience as well. All right, I want to quickly also talk here about the climate predictions that were put out by the Climate Authority today.
Misinformation.
Yeah, you want to talk about misinformation. They claimed they could go down to the very postcode and tell you in your suburb what was going to be happening in 2050. Joe, as a bloke who has advocated for change and understanding, to suggest that you can model climate down to the suburb or that there would be such huge variations between suburbs in 30-something years, good luck.
I do not understand why these guys just keep falling into this same bait and switch trap. It is just so stupid. It is such dumb politics.
Their religion.
Because I know, and this is what I'm saying. I do, of course, I believe in climate change. I believe we do need to manage our economy. We have to make sure that working people are not left worse off as a result of that. That is my one.
So just let them buy whatever car they want to buy.
But again, the old saying, one should never make predictions in politics, especially about the future. One would say the same thing about climate change, because the minute you make a wrong prediction, everyone's going to say, "See, look at this. You said it would never rain again."
No, I know.
And the whole thing's
He honestly
horseshit.
believes in Gaia. He has a belief. It's a religion for him. Now, the bottom line is...
Tim Flannery, of course, should know that. Yeah, should of course know that... and he's the one who actually...
Well, remember, it'll never rain again. The dams won't fill. Warragamba's currently 98%.
And he's the head of the council that comes out and makes predictions. They have no standing whatsoever. And yet they get reported as if they're a legitimate outfit. They're not. Yeah. And at the end of the day, whenever you get collectivism, the individuals are sacrificed to that collective. And that's exactly what's happening there. The zealots in the way the whole argument goes is the little man doesn't matter. They can just all drop off.
But also what always irritates me about it, right, is whatever predictions they end up making, Australia in and of itself does not control the damn weather. Like what's happening in China or the third world is going to matter.
But also, what is the point of putting out even more alarmist data or putting out so many sets of data that surely at least some of them are going to be wildly wrong, and then people will point to that and say this just shows the whole thing is horse crap.
It's all part of the thing of making people believe they're going to boil to death unless they can stop putting a new tax on it.
If I could create a human being, a synthetic human being, who would do the most damage to actually getting to net zero and transitioning the economy and getting more and more people on board, they will look exactly like Tim Flannery.
Correct. All right, guys, we're out of time. We will continue the conversation in the car park, but there's plenty more to do. We'll get you in front of an audience sooner rather than later. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it. The wonderful Megyn Kelly joins us from the States. She's fired up tonight. I know how much you love seeing her. You'll see that on the other side. Our favourite time of the week to talk to our favourite person in the world, the wonderful Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly Show, Sirius XM in the United States. Find it on YouTube, podcast, all the rest here. All right, let's talk about the person from the Air Force who essentially killed himself by setting himself on fire. He did so because he was opposed to the war in Gaza. He ended up dying after setting himself on fire, but obviously this was the act that ended up killing him. What do you think of this? Because it's pretty huge to see a service person willing to essentially take their own life to make a point about something that American troops are not involved in.
This is absolutely sick. What this guy did is sick, and the reaction to it is equally, if not more, sick. So he decides, as far as I can tell, there's no long history of empathizing with the citizens of Gaza or the Palestinians. However, there is a very questionable past affiliated with this group that may or may not have been abusive, and it doesn't appear that this guy had the best of childhoods. Obviously, he's mentally unwell. All right, he's either completely crazy, the way we understand that term, or he was crazy in the way we understand that term is applied to people like ISIS, who burn people in cages. All right, it's one or the other. There's something very, very deeply wrong with this man who set himself on fire with an accelerant in front of the Israeli embassy here in the United States. On any other given day, we'd say, my God, sad for his loved ones. That was uncomfortable. Don't show it on TV. And we'd move on. It's not going to change a thing about the Palestinian debate. So it's completely dying in vain. Not to mention it happens to be a sin. He's supposed to be a child of God, but okay. But the left reaction to this, their reaction has been absolutely stomach-turning. They're celebrating him for his, quote, courage and his convictions, and are taking on anyone like me who says this guy was obviously mentally unwell. Oh, there's no evidence of that. Well, other than the fact that he set himself on fire, there's that little detail. They're like, no, he was of clear mind. It was all about Palestine, about dying for the cause. And you've got presidential candidates. You've got Cornel West coming out and cheering this guy on, saying, let us never forget the extraordinary courage and commitment of brother Aaron Bushnell, who died for truth and justice, and goes on from there. And there are many others that sound just like that. So the left has lost its ever-loving mind, and what they're doing is encouraging more of this. And this really is one of those situations where if they keep this up, they're going to have blood on their hands.
Now, also, let's talk about the murder of a student at the University of Georgia. The immigration status of the person accused is really significant here. But this story, this is one of those ones that's starting to get a bit of wall-to-wall coverage, and people are desperately interested in every detail. For those of us in Australia that aren't across it, what's happened?
A young woman, 22 years old, named Laken Riley, who was at the University of Georgia nursing school, was murdered in broad daylight. She went for a run between the hours of 9 a.m. and noon or 1 p.m. and was attacked, brutally attacked, for the fun of it, is how it looks, by an illegal immigrant. No murders on this campus in 30 years. What changed? Our open border. That's what changed. This guy came in, we now know, in 2022, under Joe Biden's presidency, came right across the border claiming he needed asylum from Venezuela. And he happened to have a wife. And so, boy, you have a wife, they're never going to track you down. They're not even tracking down the single men who are of fighting age, which this guy is. But he has a wife, and they were going to seek asylum because Venezuela is so hard, and they didn't want to be there. And what they decided to do was take the life of this young woman after he committed at least 2 other crimes. But he wasn't deported. He was set loose by, I think it was the NYPD, before ICE could even slap a detainer on him. Not that the NYPD would have responded to it, because New York is a sanctuary city. So they don't cooperate with the federal immigration authorities who say, hey, hold him till we can get him and deport him, which they never really say anyway, because we're not deporting people. But in any event, it was a failure of this young woman by virtually every government authority that there is. And it's just time for this to stop. I'm sick. I've covered so many young women of this age who wind up murdered by illegal immigrants. Kate Steinle out in San Francisco, Molly Tibbetts in the Midwest, and now Laken Riley here. These are all similarly aged girls who get attacked out of nowhere or shot dead out of nowhere by someone who had no business being here and whose presence we ignored and felonies we ignored, sometimes deported multiple times, 5 times in the case of the one woman, Kate Steinle. And every time we say, it's sad, but really can't change policy in response to this one crime or these 2 crimes or these 3, and on it goes.
Now, we famously had a conversation on your show about Australia's attitude towards illegal immigration. It took reporters a few days to work out that we had that conversation, but it made big news because you were impressed with the Australian situation, which is if you come here illegally, sorry, bugger off. We're going to send you off to a third country, hopefully send you back to the country of whence you came. I think that most Americans would agree with that, and obviously we're an island, it's different, but if you make it across the southern border, then you should be detained. If you make it into a city, you shouldn't be hidden by sanctuary cities. And I think that the politics has absolutely turned here from what was accused of racism under Trump is now what people demand under Biden, even though he's seeking credit for a fire that he started.
I think you're right. I really see the numbers changing. This is becoming one of the most important issues to Democrats, which we've never seen before, not in recent history anyway. And there's a reason Joe Biden and Donald Trump on Wednesday are both going to the southern border, about 300 miles apart, but they're both going to the southern border. And this is, the same administration that told us there's no problem at the border. The border's closed. The border's secure. And now President Biden has to go down personally because he realizes his reelection is definitely on the line over this issue. I mean, he will be bounced out of office if these numbers continue. And really, honestly, at this point, even if they don't, people know he can try to look like he cares. He can try to look like it was the Republicans who scuttled that bill because they don't care about the border. People know the truth. You look back under Trump in 2020, we had 400,000 people cross the southern border, which is 400,000 too many. But this past year, we've had 3 million under Joe Biden. There's been almost no attempt at enforcement. They're coming into the country with fentanyl, drugs, with young women who are being raped and exploited by the coyotes and the drug cartels, and they're murdering our people. This woman was a 22-year-old healthy woman out for a jog, staying healthy so she could become a nurse and take care of others. Universally praised as a lovely, delightful, kind, and loving person, cut down in the prime of her life by this loser, derelict criminal who we rolled out the red carpet for to come into this country. I'm sure we're going to hear stories about us giving him a hotel and food stamps and probably a plane ticket to wherever he wanted to go. And for what? So he could murder our most promising, our best and our brightest. And what's the accountability? Who cares if he goes to prison? I don't even care. I want him out. I want them all out. I want them to get back to their own countries and they can terrorize the people of Venezuela instead of the United States, where we used to be a country of law and order.
Sing it, sister. MK for 28. We need you for a few more years here so you can be president in 2028, okay? We love you, darling. See you next week.
Love you too. Thanks for having me.
Couple of little plugs before we get to the late debate. Obviously, we'll be back same time, same bat channel tomorrow. But also coming up in a few weeks' time is the Tasmanian state election, and the People's Forum will be here on Sky News on March the 20th. Fingers crossed we can go down there to be there before, during or after. Here's the late debate.